The picture has greatly improved for conventional oil and gas in the last several months, mainly because of the development of potentially large new oil reserves in the Devonian reef areas, anywhere from 1.5 to 3 miles deep below the plains west of Edmonton and Red Deer. We call that the Pembina play for oil. And then another play developing up in northwest Alberta. This area we call Elmworth. The combination of the two, from what we know as proved at this time, would I say add a couple of $2 billion to the value of energy resources proved in Alberta. Potentially they could add anything from 20 to $30 billion of added worth to the proved resources of Alberta and thus of Canada.
Hello, I'm Murray Dale. While some parts of Canada and many parts of the world are suffering serious economic problems, including energy shortages and unemployment, Alberta is experiencing a boom. A major boom in oil and gas development centered here in West Pembina, not far from Edmonton. Several companies have found oil within the past year, thousands of feet below an oil field that was discovered 20 years ago. This area has become the most active play in Canadian history in terms of the number of dollars spent on drilling rights, seismic work, and exploration drilling. The potential of West Pembina is so great the zeros boggle the mind. We're talking about billions of barrels and billions of dollars. And not far from here, exploration drilling has encountered volumes of natural gas that will run into the trillions of cubic feet. We'll be back to discuss the impacts of Alberta's latest oil boom in just a moment. The West Pembina oil development and the Elmworth gas field will add billions of dollars to Alberta's treasury. Calgary oilman Carl Nickle says new seismic techniques are the key to the latest successes.
In Canada, the picture has greatly improved for conventional oil and gas in the last several months, mainly because of the development of potentially large new oil reserves in the Devonian reef areas, anywhere from 1.5 to 3 miles deep below the plains west of Edmonton and Red Deer. We call that the Pembina play for oil. And then another play developing up in northwest Alberta from Grand Prairie west of the BC border. This area we call Elmworth. And in the general Elmworth area, a series of gas discoveries have been made over another very wide area, which makes it look now as though this general Elmworth play will bring new gas reserves equal to anywhere from twice to as much as 5 times the normal annual discoveries of gas in all sources in Western Canada.
Mr. Nickle, what can you tell us about the technological development which has led to the discovery of oil below the West Pembina cadmium field?
Well, I can't give you any detail on the new seismic techniques because that, of course, is something held confidential by the companies who have developed it. But in the case of Pembina, the Chevron Standard Company spent some 3 years in detailed seismograph work in this general Pembina area and developed, obviously, improved means of determining the lay of the land or the lay of structures in reefs 2 or 3 miles below the surface. As a result of that work, they began a drilling program just over a year ago, and in January 1977 came up with the first Devonian reef discovery on the west side of Pembina. Since that time, another 8 to 10 discoveries have been made by Chevron and by other companies. The seismograph techniques there, of course, are going to be caught up with by other companies as they all strive fast to learn. Seismograph has also been a factor in determining the drilling program in the Elmworth gas area. Other companies, big and small, have been developing improved seismograph techniques on the shallow Alberta plains. For example, in the shallow plains east of Edmonton around Saddle Lake, improved seismograph methods over the past year have improved by at least 100% the task of determining sand formations which could bear natural gas. As a result, the success ratio has greatly improved in recent months in this area as well.
Mr. Nickle says the new seismic techniques will soon benefit all Canadians when the oil companies use them to search for deep oil and gas throughout Alberta, British Columbia, and Saskatchewan. The general public really didn't twig to what was going on here until last September, when Energy Minister Don Getty made a rather vague statement about a major oil development somewhere in Alberta.
He described what he referred to as a major oil development in Alberta. He didn't say where it was, but actually the industry and the media quickly guessed where it was, because several months before that, Chevron had officially confirmed the discovery of Devonian reef oil at Pembina. The industry knew it, was carried in detail in the industry publications such as the Daily Oil Bulletin, but it didn't catch the public imagination until Mr. Getty referred to it. Now, what Getty referred to was a development play. He did not define anything as a major discovery, nor could he at that time, or should he have. But he was speaking of a development that was already public knowledge, that in this whole Pembina area, oil companies, large and small, were busily acquiring Crown Reserve properties on bonus bids from the Alberta government. Now, during 1977, and most of this coming in the final 4 months of the year, the industry paid in bonuses to the Alberta government over $141 million for rights to explore a portion of government lands in the Pembina Play. Up at Elmworth, something like $94 million was paid in bonus to the Alberta Treasury to explore gas rights up there. And in the first week of January, in a Crown Reserve sale, which brought in $40 million, $25 million out of the 40 was paid by oil companies for the right to explore and develop potentially gas-producing lands in the Elmworth area.
I was asked in a legislative committee if there had been any improvement in finding of conventional oil and gas in the province. And I have a responsibility to a legislative committee that to be as frank with them as possible and still not disclose anything that's of a confidential nature in a competitive way for a company. And so I said that there had been significant drilling results, which led me to believe that there was lots of potential for conventional oil and gas in Alberta. I didn't announce, as a matter of fact, that there had been a major discovery. I think that was a story that somebody decided to write. But I can still say there have been these significant drilling results, and I feel particularly pleased because we've been arguing with other parts of Canada that if you let the price go up and if you give incentives to the industry, you're going to have additional supplies found. And the key was activity. And this is what's happened in this case. We've had activity, and the activity has resulted in these significant drilling results. And so Eastern Canadians are now a lot more ready to accept the higher prices because they can now see tangible results.
The tremendous volumes of gas and oil already located, and which will be discovered as development continues here, will mean financial success for many oil companies and, of course, for government. But what does this wealth mean to the average Albertan and the average Canadian? First, Mr. Nickle.
A year ago or more, many of our drilling rigs were shifting outside of Canada, or were being taken apart for parts, simply because there wasn't enough work to go around. That picture has drastically changed because of Pembina Play and Elmworth. At the present time, every available drilling rig in Western Canada is now working. Other rigs are being brought in from the United States, from the Arctic. Every seismograph crew is now contracted and is working. In other words, we have full employment in the drilling and geophysical end of the industry at this time. This is likely to be a boom that will continue, I would judge, for 2 or 3 years at the very least, and maybe longer, and could only be interfered with if governments fail to recognize that huge spendings on exploration and development have to be accompanied by the ability to turn investment into revenues. In other words, there must be more markets opened up for both oil and gas from the developing new reserves of Alberta. The boom that's underway is, of course, providing direct employment for many, many thousands of people, both in offices in cities like Calgary and smaller communities. Thousands of people engaged in field work, in drilling activities, geophysical work, and producing activities. And these, in turn, are creating 4 to 5 times that number of jobs in the industries which depend upon the payroll of oil and gas. For example, every oil company or every exploration activity employing, say, 100 people will create a demand for an extra store clerk, an extra shoe clerk, extra waiters and waitresses, extra accountants, lawyers, and so on through the string. So the multiplier effect actually means that in Alberta today, probably at least 25% of all citizens of this province are now dependent, wholly or in part, upon the continued success and growth of the oil and gas industry.
Well, it has a short-term budget benefit, of course, with large bonuses. It has a terrific economic benefit because of the fact the conventional oil and gas industry employs so many people in our province. And the drilling rigs are all going, the seismic rigs are all going. We have got the oil service companies all experience their best year in history. I think all of these things make for a very strong economy in our province, and that means jobs for Albertans, and it just has to have a positive effect.
It's hard to imagine that at one time, natural gas was nothing more than a nuisance. At a time when some companies are spending millions of dollars drilling for gas, and others are planning multi-billion-dollar projects to transport natural gas, let's turn the clock back about half a century.
In those days, we used wooden derricks. Now we use steel, and much bigger derricks. In those days, going down 4,000 feet was a major enterprise. Now, well, it can go down 30,000 feet with much better equipment. In those days, natural gas was a waste byproduct. Turner Valley field was connected to Calgary and to the southern Alberta gas system. Edmonton drew its gas from Viking Kinsella gas field. The gas in Turner Valley was considered a waste byproduct. If it couldn't be sold in the Calgary gas system, then it had to be flared, it had to be wasted. So we had in Turner Valley in the 20s and 30s what we used to call Hell's Half Acre. It was a great tourist attraction. I and a host of others would go down there frequently to listen to and watch the blast of burning gas, where gas gathered from a lot of wells was burned in one central point, creating flames reaching hundreds of feet into the air, creating a near-splitting blast of sound. And in that hell's half acre, literally, over the years, because nobody, the public or government or industry, considered it had any economic value, there was wasted literally hundreds of billions of feet of natural gas.
If everyone's optimism proves to be correct, what position do you think we should take regarding the development of non-conventional sources of energy?
We must continue to press ahead with research and actual development of all forms of energy here. What we are achieving through these new discoveries of conventional oil and gas is really a stretching out of the time frame before we are going to be critically hurt by shortage of conventional energy. Now, in the case of tar sands, for example, each plant, from the concept, its approval by government agencies, the technological work, the planning, the financing, and then the construction, and finally the completion, operates in a time frame that averages about 10 to 15 years. So we must be working now in order to have production from a new tar sands plant 10 years down the road. Same with the use of coal, whether in the form of coal by itself or coal synthesized to gas or into liquid hydrocarbons. Each of these projects has a 10 to 15 year time frame, so we have to keep working now in order to have those resources when they're needed. But we are more fortunate than people of most other nations now because of the development of more conventional oil and gas, which can be utilized to create jobs now, revenues now, improve balance of payments deficits now, and at the same time give us more breathing time before we have to have all these ultimately essential major supplies of other forms of energy available to us. Every time we bring in a barrel of oil from an OPEC nation now, its cost landed on the coasts of Canada is roughly $15. If we bring in thus, as we are doing, something over 700,000 barrels a day, you can multiply that by $15. It'll give you a huge sum, literally running into hundreds, many hundreds of millions of dollars every year. Now, the volume of imports, and with rising world oil prices, the cost of those imports is going to grow unless we can expand the proportion of Canadian energy needs supplied internally or which are produced and exported to generate the same kind of cash to help pay for the oil imports in parts of Canada, which we cannot yet reach economically with Alberta oil. Now, in balance, we could, over the next few years, I would say, hold the line on our import bill on oil, and in fact, greatly improve our position to a point where exports of gas and oil from Western Canada will far more than offset the continuing import bill of OPEC oil into the East. And at the same time, continue creating demand for employment of Canadians, whether in the oil and gas industries or in the manufacture of pipe or materials of all kinds for the industry, and for those who serve the industry. And in fact, oil and gas here in Alberta stands a good chance now of being the ace in the hole for the Canada the next several years in terms of the largest single factor in bringing about a sharp improvement of the overall economy of our nation of Canada.
I think they should both go on at the same time. There is nothing about the present conventional oil and gas activity that should slow down the development of our heavy oil, Cold Lake, and Athabasca, Fort McMurray type of oil sands. I think Canada needs all of these supplies badly, and we should develop them as quickly as we can.
Less than 10 years ago, oil and gas were discovered on the north slope of Alaska. Remember that? Since that time, An oil pipeline has been built across the state, and the oil is being shipped south by tanker. And plans have been completed for a multi-billion-dollar natural gas pipeline which will run from Prudhoe Bay to the southern states. I think that those of us who do not deal in billions and trillions on a daily basis require a comparison to put Alberta's latest oil boom in perspective.
Prudhoe Bay, as a single huge field, is capable of producing roughly 10 billion barrels of oil and roughly 25 trillion cubic feet of natural gas. We don't have a single field that size in Alberta, but I would say the combination of potentials of many structures in the Pembina type oil play and the Elmworth type gas play can lead in total to reserves exceeding those of Prudhoe Bay.